Welcome to the most extensive grammar course. I'm Ashwini Chaudhary as your trainer, and we are going to discuss active and passive voice in this chapter. Active voice is a sentence where the subject performs the action stated by the verb. Please repeat and understand it more clearly. The subject performs the action. Performs the action is the tricky part here, which is stated by the verb. I know it sounds pretty confusing, so don't worry, we have a structure for this sentence which will make it much more easier to understand. In this sentence, subject takes the first place in the sentence, verb comes next, and definitely the object goes at the end of the sentence. Let's understand with the simple example. She eats an apple. She is your subject here, eats is your verb, and apple is your object. So as the definition says, the subject is performing the action which is stated by the verb. She, being the subject, is performing an action of eating an apple. That's how your active voice works. The subject plays the main role in the sentence. It performs an activity over the object. Moving on, we have a second voice which is called as passive voice, and it's opposite to what we understood in the active voice. Over here, the subject is acted upon by the verb. Please note, subject is acted upon. It's not performing the action, but it is acted upon by the verb. Here comes your structure. Object takes the first place, verbs comes second, and subject goes at the end of the sentence. I know, it's exactly the reverse what we understood in the active voice. Here is your example. The apple is eaten by her. The apple is your object. Eaten is your verb. The is eaten is your entire verb, the helping verb and the main verb. Her is your subject. So in this sentence, her is the less important part, being the subject, and the action is eaten is much more important. I know you find a little difference in this sentence that the active voice was she eats an apple, but when we convert it into passive voice, an apple is eaten by her. So if you notice here, by is a preposition that is added in the passive voice. That's correct. You always need a preposition to end a sentence in the passive voice. Don't worry, we have upcoming slides to make you understand it more clearly. How can we convert an active voice to a passive voice? Before that, let's discuss few cases where passive voice seems to be much more important than active voice. Case number 1, when your subject is missing. The trick here is missing. That means we don't need the subject in the sentence to convey our message. Example, letter is written. What do you think would be the complete form of this sentence if I try to add a subject? Letter is written by her. Letter is written by them. Letter is written by him. You can use any pronoun over there to make the sentence looks complete. But don't worry, this sentence without the subject is also complete, and that's how it is recognized as passive voice. Case number 2 is when subject is given less importance. That means we will have a subject in the sentence, but it will be given less importance. An example, the rat is chased by the cat. So the rat over here is your object, is chased is your verb or the action performed in the sentence. The cat is your subject. So in this particular sentence, I'm more concerned of what is happening to the rat rather than who is doing the chasing part or what the cat is doing in the sentence. That's how passive voice comes into picture. This is an interesting fact that everyday conversation that we have is done in active voice. But still, when you read a passage or when you convey a message in which you want to show less importance to the subject, you will need a passive voice. Moving on, we have our case number 3, when we don't want to mention the subject at all. That's correct. We will be having a subject we will be having less importance to a subject. But what about the case when I don't want to mention the subject at all, even if I know what the subject is? Here is your example. The rat is chased and it fell in the well and died. I know that's a sad story, right? The other form of the sentence would be, the rat is chased by the cat and it fell in the well and died. Let's compare both the sentences and let's understand why have we skipped by the cat or the subject in the first sentence. So remember, in the first sentence, I was much more concerned of what happened to the rat or how did the rat died. I was not concerned what was happening to the rat in the past, but I was much more concerned to how did the rat died. That's why I have skipped by the cat entirely from the sentence and said the rat is chased and it fell in the well and died. That's all. Moving on, let's focus on the cases which we were referring in our first two slides. How can we convert an active to a passive voice? She eats apple is the active voice. Take a second and write down what will be the passive voice of this particular sentence. If this is your answer, then it's correct. The apple is eaten by her. So we have taken the object to the first place. Is eaten was the verb. It has taken the second place. Her was your subject, comes at the end, and we have a preposition named as by. Let's understand what rules did we follow over here. Rule number 1 was the third form of the main verb is used along with an auxiliary verb. Very interesting fact and very important fact to convert an active voice to a passive voice. She eats apple was written in present tense, or you can say simple present tense. When I converted the sentence to passive voice, I have used the third form of the main verb and an auxiliary verb is added to the main verb. Rule number 2, we have used by before the subject. By is a preposition here which is always used before the subject. Please note that you cannot place by anywhere else apart from a place which is before the subject. Now let's discuss the cases where we have to use preposition with and to in place of by in your passive voice. Here is an example. She knows him. She is your subject. Knows is your main verb or the action performed, and it's always written in simple present tense. Him over here is your object. Let's take a second and try to convert it into passive voice. So the possible answers that you must be getting is, he is known by her. That's what we discussed in our previous slides. But there is a tricky part. In this case, you cannot use by her. You have to use known to her. Known is an activity that happens to a person rather than happening by a person. So the correct form would be, he is known to her. Let's take one more example. Water fills the glass. In this particular case, fills is your main verb. So let's try to convert it into the third form, filled. So the conversion would be, I guess most of us would be assuming right now, the glass is filled by water. If that's your answer, I would say it's incorrect because the correct form would be, the glass is filled with water. It's a necessary or a compulsion kind of thing where you cannot use a preposition by, you have to use a preposition with or preposition to in this case. So that's all for your active to passive voice or active and passive voice. Let's have a quick revision of what we studied. In active voice, subject plays the main role and it always performs an action. But in passive voice, the subject is always acted upon by the verb and subject plays the less important role in the sentence. Please go through all the cases, all the case rules that we have discussed, all the cases where we can use only passive voice and the cases where with and to has to be used as a preposition rather than by. That's all for active and passive. If you have any doubts and confusion, please connect with us. Thank you.